Vendor lock is another concern that we've had clients come forward and complain to us about. And vendor lock is a challenge for any ERP implementation because any ERP vendor is going to try and expand their footprint and get as much of their technology rolled out throughout your organization as possible. But SAP is particularly aggressive about this, not only in deploying S/4HANA, but the entire suite of SAP products. So when you implement S/4HANA, you're usually not just implementing S/4HANA, you're also implementing Ariba, you're implementing SuccessFactors. During implementation, you're also using tools like WalkMe and Signavio that are owned by SAP. And SAP has a really good knack for locking you into not only the tools you're going to use long-term, but even for the tools you use during implementation. So vendor lock, that's one of the things we're going to chat about here today in this episode of Transformation Ground Control. And we're not here just to talk about SAP's vendor lock, but SAP being the 800-pound gorilla makes it easier to use them as a case study or indicator of where the market is headed. And what I want to talk about here in today's episode is we really want to dive into flexibility, ownership of data, cost structures, competitive advantages, things that oftentimes get overlooked when we're thinking about vanilla commercial off-the-shelf software, especially when we think about cloud systems, multi-tenant cloud systems that somewhat limit your flexibility, and also looking at the vendor movement towards more homogeneous deployments of their technology, because that's what allows them to scale and be profitable. And so vendors over here trying to maximize their business model and maximize their profitability, which is understandable. The customers are over here with different needs. And I would argue that there's a direct conflict and a conflict of interest between what benefits a software vendor and what benefits the customers. And that's really the crux of what we're going to get into here in today's episode of Transformation Ground Control. And I also want to dive into not only our guest that we're going to interview today, who provides some options, who will talk about some of the different options and alternatives to consider, but we're also going to talk about, more importantly, what is it you can do as a leader to make sure that you are doing what's in the best interest of your company, not necessarily what's in the best interest of software vendors. So we're going to cover all this. We're going to unpack a lot of this here in episode 272 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 272. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm your host today. I'm the CEO of a company called Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. Excited for our guest here today. We're going to not only get into some really good topics throughout the conversation and throughout this episode, but we're going to have a really special guest here on the show. His name is Craig Scott. He's the CEO and founder of Fuuz Software. And by the way, you spell Fuuz F-U-U-Z. So it's not F-U-S-E like you would normally spell Fuuz. They have a unique branding, unique spelling of the name that is F-U-U-Z. And he's going to be on the show. He's an interesting guy. He's been a manufacturing engineer for around 30 years. He ran a tier 1 automotive operations area within his career. Started a manufacturing business, worked for an ERP vendor, and then he started this company called Fuuz about 10 years ago now. And he's someone that's done close to 500 ERP deployments globally. And he really built this company out of frustration with how rigid traditional ERP systems are. And so I figured he'd be a great guest to have on the show to talk about, what is that trade-off between rigidity, standard, fit to standard, clean core, vanilla, off-the-shelf ERP software, however you want to describe it. That's the model we're working towards in the industry. And that seems to be the de facto default for executives and for technologists to provide that vanilla off-the-shelf software, because it's what we want. It sounds good in theory. It's that easy button we're all reaching for, we're all looking for. But as we'll talk about here in today's episode, there is a definite dark side to where standard commercial vanilla ERP software is headed, especially in today's cloud environment, today's AI environment, today's environment where customers are getting more locked in than ever. and it's creating less optionality for them, less flexibility, and at the same time, increasing their cost. So what we want to do is try to provide a counterpoint to where the industry is going, which I like doing because we're not affiliated with software vendors. We don't really care what the message is. We don't really care to stick to a certain marketing script, which most software vendors and most consultants have to because they are somehow affiliated with one of the software vendors. We are not at third stage. So we're 100% tech agnostic and independent. So that allows us the flexibility to have conversations that not all people want to have. So if you're highly offended, you may not like this episode, but if you want to dig into and understand what the options are and what the trade-offs are, I encourage you to listen in here today. But Craig will be on the show, and he'll be on here in just a few minutes to talk about optionality, flexibility, customer ownership of data, preserving and maintaining a competitive advantage, especially for manufacturing types of organizations. We've got a lot to cover here in today's episode. But before we get into today's interview, I want to spend a few minutes on what's been trending in the industry and what listeners in the audience have been buzzing about here in the last few days since our last episode. One thing that we did talk a bit about last week, but I want to dive into in a bit more detail as well, is SAP's new API policy. And I want to talk about this again in the context of today's conversation, because again, today's focus and today's topic is really honing in on what sort of flexibility should customers expect from their enterprise technology stack. And part of flexibility involves the option to integrate multiple systems and integrate your data that you own as a customer, integrate it however you see fit. Even if you're doing something that is a terrible idea, that's introducing cybersecurity risk to your organization or creating technical debt, creating complexity that you don't need, that is a customer decision that needs to be made. Now, software vendors certainly provide options and tools to help make sure you don't make bad decisions, or at least give you an alternative to bad decisions. But when a vendor starts dictating to you how you're going to deploy their software, but even more concerning, how you're going to use your data and when and where and how, and if you can use your own data, which is your asset, your intellectual property, this is where I have a real problem. And I think this industry is on a slippery slope right now, in particular SAP. And I'm picking on SAP here today. I mean, I'm going to come back to this point. There's an audience question that I'm going to get to in a moment. Why do I always pick on SAP? Am I only picking on SAP? I'm not only picking on SAP, I'm picking on the entire industry, but SAP just happens to be the incumbent number one leader in the space. So by default, they get, a majority of the heat, or a majority of the criticism. They also get a majority of the profit and the upside. So along with that comes some criticism occasionally. So hopefully those in the SAP ecosystem can appreciate that. But this is an industry-wide trend that we're seeing here now, which is to limit customer flexibility to do what's best for their business model with the software vendors. And I understand that the software vendors are out to make money. They've got to maximize their profit. They've got to create scale. They've got to, they can't be maintaining or providing R&D dollars to continue to manage and support multiple systems. They need to get everyone over to a common platform. I get that. That all makes sense to me. But where I think the vendor community is taking things too far is, I think, in the world of restricting customers and what they can and can't do, I think that's a real problem. And I think if you're a leader or an executive that's considering technology or going through a digital transformation, especially if you're a CFO and you're focused on risk and you're focused on protecting the interest of the company and sort of that fiduciary duty that every executive, especially CFOs, have to their employers, I think it's really important to look at this smoke signal that's emerging in the space. The largest ERP vendor is essentially saying that we can and we will dictate to you how and if you can access your data. And I'm just going to stop for a second because it sounds made up. As I'm saying, it doesn't sound like reality, but yet here we are in 2026 and it is reality. SAP has introduced an API policy that restricts how third-party AI agents and autonomous systems can interact with your SAP data. Notice I'm saying it's your SAP data, you, the customer. This is not SAP's data. This is not their data to protect. This is not their data to dictate how and if and where and how it's going to be integrated with. It's your data. You should be able to do whatever the hell you want with it. But SAP is saying, no, actually you can't, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. We will determine for you when and if you can access that data. And by the way, we're going to hide behind this guise of stability and security, which I'm calling complete BS on. That is complete garbage. I don't think that SAP really thinks that buyers are that uninformed and that unintelligent, but it does seem like an insult to the intelligence of leaders throughout the world to say that we have to do this for platform stability and security purposes. It's complete garbage. What they're doing is they're trying to protect Joule and SAP's AI investments in SAP's ecosystem, and they're trying to get you to commit and double down on their ecosystem. Now, I see this largely as a defensive move. I think this is a reaction to a threat in the industry. I think they are recognizing that AI is a real problem. It's a real threat for them. Optionality, flexibility, open architectures, that's all the threat to SAP because it runs counter to their business model. And to be fair, it's other ERP vendors as well that don't like it. But critics of this move, and I would count myself among the many critics of this new API policy, they say it's about locking customers into the SAP ecosystem and pushing everyone towards SAP Business Data Cloud. And again, I understand that SAP is here to make a profit. They can and should continue to do that. But the way they're going about this, I think this is, I've said this for a while, and I believe it more today than I did even just a month ago, that this is the beginning of the end for SAP. I think that this is the sign of the classic sign that you've seen happen throughout business history. The incumbent 800-pound gorilla is sitting pretty and sitting happy. Right now, the stock price is doing great. Right now, they have leverage in the marketplace, and they're doing things like this because they can, and customers will tolerate it. But I'm starting to think, and I'm starting to see enough cracks in the foundation that I don't think that's going to last. And I don't think SAP and other vendors that act in this way, that act with such hubris, with such arrogance, with such disregard for what their customers need and want, I don't think that's sustainable, and it's not going to last. There's just too many upstarts, too many other options in the marketplace that give customers what they want and need at a much lower cost, by the way, with a lot less of the headache and the garbage that goes along with it. So I think, if you're SAP, if you're Oracle, if you're Microsoft, if you're Infor, if you're NetSuite, if you're any one of these big, Workday, Salesforce, any one of these big enterprise tech vendors, I would look long and hard at what SAP is doing and not follow in their footsteps. And some of them already are. I mean, I know recently Epicor, who was one of the last holdouts of not forcing their customers to the cloud, they recently announced that, no, actually, you do need to move to the cloud now, and you have until, I forgot what the date was. I think it's 2027, if I remember correctly. But point being, even those vendors that you thought weren't like SAP or weren't going to force customers into a certain path, even they're starting to do it now too. And that's what's concerning. And that's what I think this industry should be concerned about, is these short-term strategic decisions that are driving up your stock price now and increasing your valuations now. Investors are rewarding you now. But when customers start defecting from your platform and start going a different direction, then I think that's where that becomes a very short-sighted decision. So if you're an SAP customer, your AI strategy just got a lot more complicated as a result of this. But we'll dig into this deeper in upcoming episodes. But I encourage you to go read about it, this whole API policy. And I'd love to hear from you in the audience here. And let me know what you think. Is this something that is the right of SAP? Does SAP have a right to do this? And actually, to be fair, I don't know that I'm in the majority on this. I might be in the minority in my strong opinion about SAP's actions here. Certainly in the SAP community, I know there's a lot of people that agree that SAP should be doing this. However, I will say I get tons of direct messages from people that won't comment publicly on my post, but they will message me directly on LinkedIn in particular, and sometimes email, sometimes other forums, to tell me that, hey, I work for SAP or I work for an SAP partner, and I totally agree with you. This is garbage. This is BS. But, I'm towing the company line and I need to have a job. So I get it. I understand that, a lot of people aren't going to want to speak out against this. And maybe you just flat out don't agree that it's a problem. And in which case, that's fine too. I'm not here to say I'm absolutely 100% correct. I just have a very strong opinion about it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, especially if you're in the SAP community, if you're an SAP partner, if you work for SAP, and or if you are an SAP customer. I would love to hear your thoughts on SAP's new API policy. Is this kosher? Is this okay? Does it make sense? Should we put more pressure on SAP to stop this sort of stuff? Should we put more pressure on the industry to stop more of this? In fact, just to give a shameless plug here, my new book is called Welcome to the Machine, and I talk about all this stuff. I don't talk about SAP's API policy because they announced it right after I published the book, or right as the book was being published, so I couldn't quite squeeze that case study into this book. It would have been perfect. It would have been actually the opening of the book probably if it had happened in time. But the fact that SAP is forcing this API policy, the fact that Epicor is forcing people to the cloud, the fact that Oracle is doing a lot of the same, the fact that the ERP industry in general has created this machine of profitability for them and for their investors, it's causing this vacuum or this situation where customers are getting sucked up and getting chewed up by the machine. And so this book, I talk about what the machine is, but more importantly, I talk about what leaders and what businesses should do to overcome and manage the machine and not be managed by the machine. So check out the book. You can get it on Amazon. I'll include a link below, put a QR code on here on the podcast so you can scan it and buy your copy. It ships anywhere in the world, so it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, it will ship to you there, and you can also get it electronically. So enough of that. Now, a related audience question of the week. This is from a LinkedIn post that I had about SAP's antitrust situation in the EU. And if you're not aware, the European Union, the European Commission, I should say, has launched an investigation several months ago. They launched an investigation into SAP's alleged anti-competitive behavior in the third-party support space. And essentially what these allegations are saying is that SAP is making it very difficult, if not impossible, for customers to look for third-party support options outside of what is provided by SAP. And what's even worse is they're penalizing those that go to third-party support and then decide they want to go back to SAP support. They're doing back charges, or they're charging for all the time that they weren't on SAP support, which reminds me a lot of. I also had a post on LinkedIn recently where I compare SAP's business model to Blockbuster and BlackBerry and the Commodore 64. And when I'm comparing SAP to Blockbuster, what they're doing in the third-party support space reminds me of Blockbuster with their late fees. If you remember Blockbuster Video, you had to physically return the physical asset, which sounds crazy now because you can just stream it on Netflix or on your device. But back then, you had to go get a DVD. And if you didn't return it on time, they would charge you some crazy amount in terms of late fees. And Blockbuster did it because they could. That was a cash cow for them. They made tons of money off that. It was pure profit. And so it worked for a long time. It drove up their stock price and their profitability for a long time until it didn't, until Netflix came along and suddenly there was a better option. And it made total sense that why would I pay late fees when I could just get unlimited usage and unlimited ownership or possession of these DVDs without having to pay a late fee. And so totally disrupted the model. And I think that's going to happen eventually to SAP and other leaders in the ERP space. But back to the point here, this person's point is further validated by what I just said. And this is from Vinay on LinkedIn, says, have you ever found and publicized similar issues with the products of your sponsors, Oracle and Infor? All I see is SAP in the bullseye. Your content, while true sometimes, is biased and always targets SAP. This is a great question. I know I have been more harsh on SAP lately simply because they make it so easy to be. I mean, if you look at the behavior of SAP versus Oracle versus Microsoft versus Infor, Epicor, Workday, pick any other vendor, SAP is not only the leader in the space, but they are the leader and the masters of all the things that are broken in this industry. Now, having said that, I want to clarify a couple of things. Vinay makes a very serious allegation, which I take very personally, which says, have you ever found and publicized similar issues with the products of your sponsors, Oracle and Infor? Oracle and Infor are not sponsors. I do not make money off Oracle and Infor. What Oracle and Infor and other vendors, not just those two, but others have done is they have helped us host events. So we've had events like our Digital Stratosphere where we get vendors involved in that. And yes, there's probably 10 or 15 different companies that will sponsor that event to help pay for those events. So yes, we do co-events with the vendor community, but we are not sponsored by, and all of our revenue as a company comes from our clients. And when I say they sponsor our events, it's actually not even our event. It's a sister company of ours that hosts the events. They pay that sister company to sponsor our events, and none of that money flows into Third Stage or any of the consultants that are involved with Third Stage. So having said all that, setting that aside, all I see are SAP in the bullseye. Your content, while true, sometimes is biased and always targets SAP. I'm going to point you to a few things. First of all, my book rips on this industry in some ways, and it rips on everyone, not just SAP. It actually talks a lot about Oracle. It talks about Microsoft, talks about NetSuite, talks about Workday, Salesforce, talks about some of the different things that these vendors are doing that contribute to this machine. And to be fair and to be candid and just sort of take a step back, I don't blame any one person or any one company for the the wrongdoings or the problems in this industry. I blame the system. I blame the systemic problems in this industry. I don't think this is SAP's fault. SAP is reacting to the way the machine has been built. Now you could argue, they helped build the machine, maybe, yeah, sort of. But I'd say it's more investors. It's the, the profit that's being driven by this movement to the cloud and the vendor lock and that sort of thing. And you could also blame customers, because customers are the ones that enable it. They continue to pay for this sort of software and this sort of vendor lock. And a lot of times it's because they don't know any better. A lot of times it's because they don't care. A lot of times it's because they don't fully understand what the long-term implications of their decisions are. At least not yet. They will, but maybe they don't understand today. So this is the way the system was built. So I don't blame SAP. But in the book, I call out many vendors. You can go to my YouTube channel. You can find videos that talk about, for example, Oracle failures. I talk a lot about Oracle failures if you go look for it. The problem with social media today, just as a side note, is if you're in the SAP community, which I know Vinay is, just because I know who he is, he's in the SAP community. So he is naturally going to get more content pushed in front of him by the algorithm that relates to SAP. He's not going to get the content pushed in front of him that talks about Oracle, that talks about Infor, NetSuite, Workday. I've talked about failures on all their parts, especially Oracle. I've talked a lot about Oracle failures. I have a video out there called Why I Hate Oracle. It's a hyperbolic sort of video, but it talks about the dark side of Oracle Fusion. I've talked about Infor failure case studies. There's a lot of those on my YouTube channel. So if you dig around, you'll find plenty of issues that aren't limited to SAP. And I do want to make that very clear, that even though SAP is the 800-pound gorilla, they're the leader in the industry, they're not the only ones. They're far from the only ones that are contributing to this machine and creating issues here. So the independence of our company is the founding principle of the firm. So I just want to make it clear and make sure that everyone understands the facts here. Third Stage does not make money off software vendors. And if you look at even beyond Oracle and Infor, I've also called out Microsoft D365 issues. They have plenty of issues that are very unique to Microsoft and the Microsoft ecosystem and the Microsoft product. I've called out Workday's customization limits. I've talked about Workday failures. Just go to my YouTube channel, search the word failure. You're going to find a lot of stuff there that goes well beyond SAP. So, but you are right about one thing. SAP gets the most airtime. And again, why is that? It's because SAP has the largest customer base, the most aggressive forced migration timeline, in my opinion, the most public lawsuits, the most antitrust scrutiny, and the most controversial decisions, in my opinion, like the API policy that I just mentioned. So they're the biggest player making the biggest and boldest moves. That's where my bias, if I do have one, that's where it comes from. And keep in mind too, because we're independent and agnostic, my only job and our only job as a consulting firm, and this is our bias, I will be candid and 100% forthcoming that we are biased. And if we do have a bias that goes too far, we are biased on the side of customers. So end customers are the only ones paying us, and that's all we care about is seeing them succeed. So if Oracle does something equally aggressive or something that I think harms customers, I'm going to talk about it next month. So tell me if there's something I'm missing, tell me, and I will cover it. If it's about Infor, if it's about Workday, if it's about Salesforce, whoever, pick a vendor. If you've got news, if you've got a failure, if you've got some tactic that they're pursuing that you think hurts customers, tell me about it. And I would love to cover it. In fact, I enjoy covering it because I think more customers should hear those things. So the job here isn't to balance the vendors. My job is to call it like I see it. And right now, SAP is the one that's doing a lot of things that's giving me a lot of content to work with here. So if I'm wrong, if you see other stuff that other vendors are doing that are comparable to what SAP is doing to harm their customers, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion. I'm not saying I have to be careful legally what I say here, but my opinion is that SAP is doing things that harms their customers long-term. But if other vendors are doing something similar or something different that still harms customers, let me know, and I'd be happy to cover it here in this podcast as well as on YouTube as well. So coming up, we are going to talk with Craig Scott from Fuuz Software, and we're going to dig deep into something most CIOs don't know they have, which is alternatives to the monolithic ERP systems, including, but not limited to, SAP, Oracle Fusion, Microsoft D365, NetSuite, Workday, et cetera, et cetera. Craig's built his platform out of 500 ERP deployments worth of frustration, and he's got a perspective that you don't hear enough, and that perspective really focuses on client-focused needs, flexibility, optionality, less vendor lock, more leverage in the vendor relationship, all that kind of stuff we're going to get into here in just a moment. And we'll get into that here in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you only attend one event this year, make it Digital Stratosphere 2026. It's our annual flagship conference. It's going to be September 9th through 11th in Denver, Colorado, the same location as we held it last year. It's 3 days where digital leaders, ERP practitioners, and transformation experts come together for no-spin, vendor-neutral conversations on ERP, AI, and digital transformation. There's no marketing fluff. There's no pay-to-play sponsorships, just real practitioners sharing real lessons. Go to thirdstage-consulting.com/stratosphere to learn more and register. Tickets are limited, and these always sell out, and I'd love to see you there. Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. My name is Eric Kimberling, and excited for our guest here today. Craig Scott is the CEO and founder of a company called Fuuz Software. Fuuz, I'll let him describe in a moment what they do exactly, but they create a platform and an integration tool that allows companies to deploy and use multiple systems and sort of get the best of all worlds in terms of what technologies they might have or might be deploying. And one thing that is really interesting to note here about Fuuz, and really what the theme is we want to get into, is just optionality, flexibility, data ownership, vendor lock. We want to talk about the things that customers should be thinking about. And these are all the things that don't show up on a RFP checklist or an RFI checklist. They don't show up in the vendor demos. They don't show up in the reference calls. But this is absolutely something that all leaders that are considering new technology should be considering, are these things. How much flexibility do we get to maintain? How do we access our data? What kind of ownership of the data do we have? These are all really important things that are worth thinking about. And so with that all being said, Craig, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been excited to have you on the show because, like I said, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I think one of the things missing from the ERP software space is just the understanding of the full suite of options that customers really have. I think a lot of times people have this misconception that, I've got the traditional monolithic incumbent ERP vendors, and beyond that, it's a huge drop, or there's not really a lot of options for me. But tell me, that's my thought on the space and kind of where you guys fit. But tell me a little bit about you, your company, why you started Fuuz. Maybe just give us a quick background of you and the company, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. I actually started off as a manufacturing engineer about 30 years ago now in Tier 1 automotive. So we're based out of the Detroit area, so as you can imagine, a lot of automotive, a lot of aerospace and defense here locally. So I got my feet wet working in operations. I started a manufacturing business myself in the mid 2000s there, 2012, 2013. And then found myself working at an ERP vendor, actually for a short while. That was my first foray into tech and IT and all that kind of stuff. Obviously I was aware of it being in operations, but it was never my, my full-time job. So having worked there for a couple of years in the manufacturing space, really understanding what companies were struggling with when it comes to digital transformation, I started my system integration business, which is still around. They're still doing ERP implementations. We did, in about 9 years, we did between 450 and 500 ERP deployments globally. And that included everything from shop floor up to finance. So we were dealing with IT, OT, all of the pain points. So we've got a lot of experience there. That's really what led to us developing the Fuuz platform. From our perspective as a service provider, it was extremely difficult to not only be successful as a company, but to ensure success for our clients, having so many different options and so many different things to pick from. And then after you made all of those selections, just the risk associated with integrating all these things and maintaining them over time, and doing it within a budget that was acceptable to the customer, right? So all of those challenges we kind of took in consideration. Around 2015, we started building the Fuuz platform. It was really our secret sauce for a while, and then we started selling commercially in 2018. Hence, a lot of folks have never heard of us or what we do. So, we're excited to get the word out, and really help people understand how there is a solution for bridging that IT/OT divide, and also getting away from the idea that you mentioned, right? Like, I have to be part of this vendor's ecosystem in order for everything to work. And that's just not true anymore.
Yeah. Well, you were telling me yesterday as we were prepping for this conversation, you made a comment that was really interesting. You said that your experience in the ERP vendor space, and in particular working for an ERP vendor, you realized how, and I'm paraphrasing what I think I heard you say, which is you said something along the lines of you realized how inflexible ERP software can be. I don't know if you use that exact word, but that's the impression I got. Inflexible. You couldn't customize the way you might need to or want to satisfy a customer need. Tell me more about that. Like, how did that feed into your vision for the product and for the company itself?
Yeah. That's spot on, right? Flexibility and extensibility, I think, are the two words that CIOs and CTOs dream about at night, right? And typical ERP approach is monolithic, object-oriented data models. They're very strong, they're very good at GAAP. They're very good at accounting for the things that you've made, but they're not very good at helping you make the things that you need to account for. And that's kind of where we saw the opportunity. I've been in, thousands of manufacturers and, all over the globe. And no matter how many times they tell me they're simple or they do things the same way everybody else does, there's always nuance. And right. I think talking to the end users on the shop floor gives you a much different perspective than sitting in the conference room with the IT leadership, who's several levels disconnected from that shop floor, right? And it's at that time I realized that was kind of an unfortunate side effect of what was happening. Is we had leadership making decisions on technology without fully understanding what's really going on the plant floor. So then you'd get, halfway into an implementation, you start having all of these functional gaps, technical gaps, and that's where the flexibility of the software really became a challenge for us implementing ERP in manufacturing environments. That's where we thought, there's got to be something that we can do to offer the extensibility and flexibility, but while maintaining that standardization that the ERP enforces.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I've got a question. I'm going to ask you this question in a second, Craig, but I've got a question for the audience. And by the way, we're watching the streams and all the chats right now. Or we're watching the chats and all the streams we're streaming to right now. So any questions you've got for us related to this topic, please jump into the conversation in the chat here. We're watching on TikTok as well as YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. But I want to know from the audience, I'm going to ask you this too, Craig, is what are your thoughts on customization and flexibility? Like, I know it's a big open question, but I want to hear what the audience thinks about customization and flexibility. And, in particular, how does that compare? What are your thoughts on customization and flexibility versus standard, fit to standard, clean core, off the shelf, traditional ERP software? Because I think that's the debate we're having in the industry right now. And I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute. I'm going to put my technologist hat on, the technical architect hat on, and say, well, look, Craig, that all sounds good what you're saying, but wouldn't life be so much easier if we could just use one simple system off the shelf, as built, pre-configured? I don't need to recreate the wheel. Why would I want a solution like Fuuz that gives me that flexibility? Because sometimes flexibility is a bad thing. It could backfire. I mean, I could end up breaking stuff and recreating the wheel in some cases. So how do you help customers navigate that continuum of options?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a couple different sides to that that we could probably jump into here. On one side, I think what makes a manufacturer special is the way they make their products, right? It's not the product they make. Of course, if you're in a commodity business, I guess you could make this argument that you can build that commodity the same way everybody else builds that same commodity, right? So what differentiates you as a manufacturer? What's your competitive advantage? Is it your internal business systems and processes? Is it your people? What is it? And I think identify that and then use that as a tool to assess where you need to go from a technology standpoint. If you have no differentiator, then I would argue, what are you doing, right? Why are you even in business? We all have to have a differentiator, right? You've got differentiators, we have them, and I think you need to expose those, and you need to bring those to the surface so you understand really from a tech standpoint what's important. Not everybody needs customization, though I'll say that's configuration and customization. We know what those things are, right? There's something in the middle, though. There's actually a space in between that I think many people aren't that familiar with, and it's more of an emerging space. It's things like what we do with the platform, right? When you get into this low no code, drag and drop citizen developer concept, now you're kind of abstracting that customization layer. You're not building custom software anymore. You're just adapting business processes within a constrained system that's commercialized and supported. It's a totally different concept than what I've seen happen traditionally, where we've got rooms of software engineers writing code, right? And putting the organization at risk and, essentially on an island, right? And that's what we want to avoid. That's why every ERP vendor is moving to cloud, right? Because we want to get away from versions. We want to get to a versionless system that all of our customers can utilize. They're always up to date. We can mitigate, eliminate security risks, all of the things that plague organizations. That's why we're making these shifts to cloud. And now you invite in, the era of AI, right? So that brings up a whole nother point there. I think when you have the ability to extend the application, not necessarily customize, but when you have the ability to extend, you can always start with something that's off the shelf or out of the box and then grow beyond that. And that's where you get to value quick, but that's where you maintain value in the long term.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you. And here's a comment. First of all, I want to say hello to a few people that are joining on multiple platforms here. I want to say hello to Aditya on YouTube, joining from India. Thank you for being here today. Also want to look at, we're getting a lot of activity on TikTok too. Want to say hello to Lindsay for joining today. Hello, Mike. Hello, Jennifer. Thank you for being here today. Siempre Solo. Thank you for being here today. Gonzalo, thank you for joining today. And Endow Boy and is here today as well. And then Kai, thank you for joining as well. But here's a question that came up related to what you were just saying, Craig. This is from, and I want to say hello to Yusuf too. He's got a question I'm going to get back to here in a moment. But this is from user Brian, says, customization can get quickly complicated over time that you end up stuck in a system that's hard to maintain.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that? How do you navigate that balance? Because I think you can take customization or this flexibility concept too far to where you're essentially now you're stepping into this no man's land of now, are you really deploying off the shelf software? Or you've got a completely custom solution here because you've changed it so much. So how do you navigate that to what he said?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough divide. We work with a lot of larger organizations that feel customization is just necessary, to be able to operate effectively. And as you kind of go down market into small mid-size, we see the opposite, right? We see more desire for off the shelf, configure functionality, and that's great. If you're in a growth mode and you want to start with something like that, just know that ultimately you're going to reach a point where you're going to need more than what off the shelf is going to be able to do for you. And that's especially when it comes to manufacturing operations. Things get more complex, not simpler, the bigger you get. You get more people, you get more processes, you've got batch, discrete, process all under one roof. Companies start to do, vertical integrations. And this is where you have to be really aware of kind of where you're going in the future. And if you want to stay a $30 million manufacturer, then that's totally fine. But if you have desires to grow, I think you need to think a little bit bigger than your typical off-the-shelf solution. And again, I think a lot of people are still stuck in a legacy mindset that it's either off-the-shelf or custom, and that's it's just not necessarily the only two options that you have anymore.
Yeah.
The way things are done now with modern platforms and modern technology. For example, 100% of our customers are all on the same version of Fuuz, and there's thousands of sites globally. So someone might ask, well, how is that even possible? Because I talk to many companies who have 3 or 4 different versions of SAP running, right? Or, maybe half a dozen versions of QAD or Infor, and they're trying to consolidate all of that down. And it's really just a difference in how technology has evolved over the past 3 decades. You started talking about monolithic applications, and we kind of get stuck in that mindset that if I want to extend this thing, I just have to write code. But look at more modern tech. I know SAP is coming out with some things, right? This, clean core concept to give you some ability to extend. Of course, that just keeps you in that SAP ecosystem. And we can talk about all the API and, data ownership situations with that. But there is a middle ground. And I would say that's where we're at with, low no code platforms. It's a much different approach than what people are generally accustomed to.
That's a really good point, Craig. And I want to take a moment to do a quick myth bust here, because customization is not the same as failure. I think a lot of times organizations or software vendors, I should say, have this mindset, and they sell this mindset that customization is bad. Customization is technical debt. Customization is resistance to change. Customization can't be scaled. Some of that, there's a little bit of truth to that, but that's only partially true. There's another dimension here that so many organizations don't think about. And the industry's done a really good job convincing customers that customization is, this dirty word. But the reality is that smart customization preserves your competitive advantage. Now, bad customization preserves your bad habits. So there's usually a bit of both. When we work with clients looking at their old customization, it's usually a mix. Usually, quite honestly, it's a majority are competitive advantages, but there's oftentimes 20, 30, 40% of the customization was just, okay, you didn't need to do that. There wasn't any real business value or purpose to it other than someone on your team or a squeaky wheel somewhere in the organization didn't like the way the core software worked, and they changed it to do something that maybe it wasn't meant to do. But those are two different things. And I can't remember a situation that I've ever been involved with where all customization was bad. All customization should have just been thrown out because it didn't make any sense. Usually it's a good subset, if not a majority of the customization is to preserve some sort of competitive advantage. If we all operated on the same system, we wouldn't have a competitive advantage. So those are two different things. Customization to preserve competitive advantage versus bad customization to preserve bad habits are two different things. And so if your shop floor has a unique scheduling approach that took 20 years to refine, and it's the reason your on-time delivery is 30% better than your competitors, that's not customization, that's your moat. So standardizing is a way to make life easier for your IT team and your software vendor, but it is also corporate self-harm. It might actually harm your business and your operations more than it harms your IT department and more than it harms or makes life difficult for your software vendor. So the right question isn't, should we customize? The right question is, what about us is genuinely different? And is that difference worth defending? And if that answer to that is yes, then defend it, even if the vendor doesn't like it. And with that, I'm going to play you a quick clip. This is a case study of a client that we recently worked with not too long ago. And we talk here about some of the lessons here that we have that I think are super helpful. So let me play this real quick clip, and then we'll come back. All of these sorts of things came a little bit more naturally to this particular sponsor because of his operations first type of mentality. And up until this point, most of my experience as a consultant had been working with CIO types, people that came up in the technology world. So it was really different and refreshing at the same time to see someone that came at it from a business perspective. But not only did I like working with that type of personality a little bit better than some of the more technology types at the time, it was more about how easy it was or how effective it was for him to make decisions and to lead the project and provide direction and vision. So that was one of the big lessons I had from that project, was the fact that having a business-oriented executive sponsor and someone that was really helping guide and set the vision and approach for the project can actually help tremendously. The other component of this project that was
very eye-opening for me was that everything was a business first perspective. So every decision that was made was around how does this support the business? If it doesn't support the business or improve the business, then we're not doing it. So we didn't deploy technology for technology's sake. There were times where we left technology off the table and chose to stick to manual processes or Excel spreadsheets in some cases, because those processes were so finely tuned and so efficient and they worked. So we weren't about to break those in the name of just putting in new technology. And so that was one of the early lessons that really formulated and influenced how I thought about digital transformations from that point on.
So that's just a case study that I posted on my YouTube channel quite some time ago. That was about 6 years ago. In case you're wondering why I look so much younger then, it's because I was younger 6 years ago. But that was a case study about one of the best implementations I had been involved with, and more specifically, one of the best executive sponsors I had worked with. And it was someone who knew very little about IT. It was someone that only really looked at things from a business perspective. And I thought he was one of the most highly effective executive sponsors I'd ever worked with. So good stuff there. And I think that's a good reminder that, you have to make these decisions that we're talking about here with Craig. You've got to make these decisions in the context of what's best, not just for the technologists, not just for the software vendor, not just for the system integrator that's there to promote the interests of the software vendor, but the most important person, the most important stakeholder group is going to be your business and your operations. What is best for them, even if it means that things get a little more complicated with your technical team. Things might even cost a little bit more money from a technical perspective. You've got more integration. You've got more risk on the technical perspective. At least within IT, your risk is confined. When you've got a technical risk, an architecture risk, you've confined that risk to one group. When you expose your business to risk, you've got an entire end-to-end process now that can break. And usually the cost of not being able to ship product, not being able to close the books, not being able to run payroll, just major material financial impacts, that cost, that risk is usually exponentially more than any risk or cost that might come from the technical difficulty that comes with doing something that's not within the prescribed roadmap that software vendors want you to pursue with that standard, generic use of software off the shelf. So we've got a lot more to cover. I'm going to get back into the conversation here with Craig in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave Phase Zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
Here comes all those fantasies taking me to my room.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. We're here with Craig Scott. We're talking about flexibility, optionality, data ownership, competitive advantage, alternatives to traditional monolithic ERP systems. We're covering a lot of stuff, a lot of ground here today, and I'm excited to jump back into it that are somewhat related that I think are worth digging into a little bit more because these are two variables and themes that I don't think enough leaders at least think about, and that is the ownership and control is essentially what you're alluding to with some of the API restrictions that SAP has now put in place, where they're essentially trying to get you boxed into the SAP or the SAP sanctioned or approved ecosystem, versus wanting to bring in third-party tool sets that they don't necessarily approve of. And then you were also talking about flexibility and long-term competitive differentiators. It's hard because in this. You and I were talking before we went live. We were talking about how there's so much noise in this industry. There's so much marketing spend on this concept of clean core, fit to standard, off the shelf, pre-configure best practices. And on the surface, it's kind of what we all want to hear, right? It's like, that sounds awesome. Like just off the shelf, pre-configured. It fits my business. But to your point, all you have to do is think about if every company in your industry was using the exact same configuration of the exact same software, what would your differentiator be, and is that sustainable? And my thought would be that's not sustainable. You've got to have some sort of competitive differentiator, and if you're all using one system the same way, that's not it. So
right.
How do you navigate that? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges in our industry is it's the difference and the disconnect between what sounds good in theory versus what actually works on the business front lines of a manufacturer or any other sort of company.
Yeah. I mean, how do you address that? That's an interesting question. I think one of the ways that we and our partners tend to do that is through these, DTMA type projects and processes, where you go in and really talk to the front line, talk to the end users and get a good understanding of what's going on. And sure, there's always going to be inefficiencies that you could probably correct with something off the shelf. Not everybody's doing everything right. But I would argue that any business that's of any type of scale probably has their ducks in a row to some degree. They probably have pretty robust processes. They're ISO, they're TS, they're AS 9000 certified. They've got quality systems in place. They have all of these different checks and balances. And then you're going to come in with some off-the-shelf system. And you've done a bunch of ERP projects too. I know that in the past, right? What I always told my clients, they're the two biggest risks. Number one is your data, because nobody ever has good enough data to just move it right into this new system. And the other big risk I always told them to watch out for was change management. And change management will kill any software or digital transformation project quicker than anything I've ever seen. And when you try to implement off-the-shelf best practices within a manufacturing organization, all you're asking for is a huge change management project, right?
Right.
I've seen projects go much faster, much smoother, and well under budget when we're able to go in and just replicate existing processes. People are already trained, they're familiar, they understand, right? And then you can iterate over time, but you can't iterate over time with standard off-the-shelf software. Right. That's the big limitation. So you take all the upfront risk for, in my opinion, no reward on the back end of it. You're going to have, I can't tell you how many implementations I've been in where like the shipping folks just like walked out the door, literally quit their job on the spot because they got so frustrated with the software. They couldn't do their jobs, and people take their jobs pretty seriously. I think, when you get to the front lines, right, there's a lot of pride in that. And when the software gets in the way, that's extremely frustrating. So technology is supposed to be an enabler. It's not supposed to get in the way. And I see off-the-shelf software all too often just gets in the way.
Yeah. As you were saying this too, I was thinking about how, we at Third Stage, we work with obviously a lot of IT people, a lot of people that work for the CIO, but then we also work with a lot of frontline people. I mean, that's a big part of what we do, especially on the change management training side of things. But I think and this is a broad generalization, I don't mean to offend anyone that's in IT, but I think a lot of technologists and people that came up through the ranks in IT sometimes they fail to really stop and think about how technical decisions and technical convenience that might work really well for the IT department is actually very disruptive to the business. And it's easy to say, well, that's because they're resisting change, or, they don't understand the vision of the company, and that, they don't understand the possibilities of technology or whatever. It's easy to write it off and say, well, that's why, but we're sticking with our plan to go fit to standard, clean core, one simple system, whatever. And I think that disconnect between business and IT, and in a lot of what you're alluding to, the shop floor, frontline people, these aren't people, like you said, they take pride in their work. These aren't people that want to disrupt or sabotage a project like this. These are people that want the business to function the way it should and could function. And a lot of times there's a disconnect between what sounds good on technical, from a technical perspective versus what actually works on the front lines. Is that a big part of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, 100%. That's kind of what got us where we are today. And all of the ERP implementations that we were doing, we were working with a system that was pretty rigid. It was great at a lot of things, but it wasn't really good at any one thing. Right. So a lot of times we had to go into companies that had to, unfortunately, make a lot of concessions on the way that they wanted to operate. They had to just kind of fall on the sword, I guess, to accept the way the software was, literally going to force the way they changed their business mode of operation. And that's where we saw, that's fine as a clean core, right? That's fine for off the shelf, and that works in the standard mode, but you need something outside of that. You need something that allows you to extend and augment and address those gaps when they come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's an interesting comment on YouTube. This is from Aditya, and I apologize if I'm butchering your name, but hopefully you know who you are here. Aditya says, working in the ERP space, I've seen that every customer wants a set of custom features according to their use in business, but our software basis setting is what is liked by most customers. So that, I think this comment gets to the heart of the debate, or the heart of the tension or the conflict between off-the-shelf standard software, which is what, even if most customers are doing things a certain way, it doesn't mean you do or should do things that way. And that's the rub. Correct. You've got to decide, like, what's more important, to be like everyone else from a technical perspective, or do I want to preserve some sort of competitive advantage without necessarily overcomplicating things?
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's, when you talk about IT versus OT, right? Or maybe not versus, but IT and OT, there's also a big difference there. I agree wholeheartedly that ERP is pretty standard, right? You've got GAAP that you need to follow here in the States. You've got a general ledger with debits and credits. You have accounts payable, accounts receivable. Those processes have been around for hundreds of years. Right. And they haven't really changed much. They've gotten to be more efficient with the advent of technology and three-way matching and things like that. But you really you're not going to gain much value in the business by throwing that new ERP system in, right? Not for a manufacturer. Right. The manufacturers need to look at operations a little bit more than I think they have historically. And they've tried, I think IT has tried their best to kind of shoehorn operations into the IT technology. They've tried to shoehorn MES and WMS into the ERP. And by doing so, you essentially make operations have to conform with the way that ERP functions. And it all falls back to the way finance wants it to operate, right? So having owned a manufacturer in the past, the last thing that I ever wanted was my finance department dictating how my operations was going to run on the shop floor. So I knew right away that I had to have a separation of concerns there. I had to be able to operate on the shop floor efficiently and move quickly, right? You need agility out there, and you need to be able to move equipment around. You need to, you have temp employees that come and go. You need to be able to train them quickly. You need to be able to have systems in place that allow you to operate as efficiently as possible to get quality product out the door to your customers, right? It's your lifeblood as a manufacturer. And an ERP system is always going to get in the way of that, no matter what the vendor says. So that separation of concerns. Standard off-the-shelf ERP, I think a lot of businesses can get away with that, right? Like even QuickBooks, we have customers, that are 50 million plus in revenue using QuickBooks. Because at the end of the day, when you have an operations layer that lets you do what you need to do out there, you've got your traceability, your shop floor scheduling, your operator training, you do all of that where it needs to happen. And the result of all of that is debits and credits.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I can't put it any simpler than that.
Yeah. No, that's really well said and a really good point. And so I think, the message here, the lesson that I'm taking away is that you have to distinguish and separate different parts of your business, because some are going to lend themselves very well to standard off the shelf software.
For
but
sure.
Then there'll be some that don't. And I think you're right, especially for a manufacturer, when you look at the way you make your product itself, and also the way you do the configure, price, quote, the order management, that front end customer facing side of it too, that's where
a big
things
part. Yep. Yeah. I mean, we even see all the way down to, bombs and recipes, right? I mean, sometimes that's a competitive advantage for the organization, especially when you get into some of these food and beverage verticals or chemical manufacturers, where that truly is your secret sauce. You have these proprietary bombs and recipes that you need to maintain. You might have a PLM or something like that, but you're not going to do that and maintain that within an ERP. Not to say companies don't. I've seen it, and I've seen them struggle with it. I haven't seen one that was truly happy with what they were getting out of that, right? Because it requires a lot of customization. ERPs are built for planning, hence enterprise resource planning, right? They're not built for execution.
So I want to take a minute and pause on what Craig just said, and that is that ERP is for planning. It's not for execution. Now look at the name, enterprise resource planning, not enterprise resource doing. The architecture, the data model, the transactions, all of it was built for planning, accounting, and reporting. None of it was built for what happens on the shop floor at 2 a.m. when a machine goes down. So that's the key thing to keep in mind. Now, even though ERP systems were largely used by manufacturers to start, it was still more on the planning side. It was more on the MRP side of things to do. In fact, ERP systems used to be called MRP systems, which is material resource planning. And that's what ERP systems came from. That's the world they came from. And so here's what most companies do. They buy a big ERP system, and then when they try to run their entire operation through it, such as shop floor scanning, quality data, real-time scheduling, equipment telemetry, those are things that ERP was never designed to do. And then when it doesn't work, which it won't, and it doesn't, they blame the ERP system or they blame themselves. We must be doing this wrong. Well, the thing is, you're not doing it wrong. You're probably just using the wrong tool for the wrong job. ERP is a great tool for what it's built for, but if you're trying to run real-time operations through your ERP, you're trying to drive a screw with a hammer. You've got to get the right tool for the right layer of your business, and stop blaming yourself when things don't work. What I want to do, though, is just show you a real quick clip that might help drive this point home. And this is a video I posted a couple of years ago that is focused on MES systems. And so in this video, I talk real quickly about what manufacturing execution software does and how it is slightly different from ERP software. So let me roll this clip for you real quick. In ERP systems, track things after the fact for the most part. You might enter work in progress as they move from major segments of the manufacturing facility to others, or you might track it in the system once it goes to the warehouse. But what manufacturing execution systems do, on the other hand, is they track at a granular level what's happening on the shop floor. It tracks steps throughout the process. It's gathering information from sensors and robots and people as inventory and work in progress is moving through the manufacturing facility. MES also fills the gap or takes ERP functionality one step further in terms of manufacturing resource planning or manufacturing production scheduling. Those are often referred to as the MRP or MPS modules within ERP. And what those modules do is they define at a high level what needs to be produced and when do raw materials need to be purchased to support that production. But that's sort of where ERP systems oftentimes stop. So that's a clip from my YouTube channel, or a YouTube video on my channel, where I talk about MES systems and how it's different from ERP. And I think that's something worth noting here is, we put too much focus a lot of times, especially in the manufacturing space, we put too much focus on ERP and we don't focus enough on the operating technology, the OT, the manufacturing technologies that are ultimately going to make your business better, more efficient, more profitable. So good stuff there. We're going to get back into the conversation. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back and talk more with Craig Scott around this whole concept of flexibility, optionality, all that good stuff. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 272. I'm here with Craig Scott. We're talking about optionality, flexibility, data ownership, competitive advantage, how ERP fits in the world of the broader enterprise tech landscape, why monolithic ERP systems aren't the end-all be-all that they oftentimes are marketed as. We've got a lot left to dive into, so let's jump back into it.
You got to think about that as an IT. Like, what are you forcing down the throat of the manufacturing side of the business that may interfere with the business, right? It's going to cause disruptions and missed shipments and, all kinds of other side effects that we might not be thinking of if we're just too focused on standard off the shelf.
Right. And there's a comment or a question here on TikTok. Someone said, where is it? This is from Muhammad on TikTok. Says, what's your opinion on Infor-LN? And the reason I'm picking that comment is because Infor-LN is very strong in manufacturing. It's very tailored for manufacturing. But even in the case of this product where it's designed for this specific industry, there's still limitations. And we have clients that are implementing Infor-LN and it's going well. It's a great product, but they've had to extend the capability or add third-party bolt-ons to accommodate some of the challenges or some of the limitations. And I don't even want to say it's a limitation of the software. It's just a difference between the way the software is built and the way the business runs and needs to operate. And that's exactly what you guys are addressing. And I actually wanted to come to your right behind you. You've got for those that are they're listening to the audio only version. There's a little marketing sign that Craig has right behind him. It says your stack amplified.
I can't move the right way.
I know everything's backwards on these cameras, but it says your stack amplified, not replaced. And so maybe talk a bit about that, because I think it gets to this whole point of like, okay, I've got this ERP system that I think is going to be a really good fit. It's getting pretty close to what I need. I'm not necessarily having to choose between traditional ERP system and something like Fuuz. It could be they coexist in many cases, right?
100%. Yeah. And I would say 100% of our customers do have ERP systems, ranging from SAP, ECC to S4 to Oracle, Infor, all of the Infors, right? QAD. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I think to your point, these things I would not categorize as limitations of the ERP system, because I think to categorize it that way would be to frame it as though the ERP should be capable. Right. And the ERP should not be capable of reaching down that far to the shop floor, right? They're not built for that. They're not architected for that. They're transactional systems, not event systems. I think that's a big difference too, that a lot of folks don't necessarily understand. ERPs are also stateless. So we might touch on that, what that means from a UNS perspective. Stateless architecture is not designed to run, high volume events. So when you get onto a shop floor and we have operators that are scanning barcodes and they're posting production and scrap and tracking downtime, and maybe you're getting telemetry data off of the machines, right? You're getting, temperatures and pressures and speeds and feeds, and you want to create this digital twin of your manufacturing operation. Those are not things that ERPs are ever designed to do. And sometimes companies try to extend them down to that level. And then when things don't go the way they think it should, they frame it as a limitation of the software. And it's really more of a matter of wrong fit.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where a system like Fuuz comes in. To your point, we really advocate to not rip and replace. When at all possible, we have a lot of CIOs that want to consolidate systems. Maybe you have too many point solutions that are creating too many data silos. That's a place where we'll oftentimes come in because our platform can extend from MES to WMS to maintenance to quality to, even just general line of business, supply chain management, EDI. So you can do that, but that's usually not where most companies are at. They have a problem they want to solve. They want to knock down all the data silos, and they want to standardize on a data platform that doesn't lock them in is where we see, a lot of companies coming from.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the data layer, here's a question I'm hesitant to ask because this is way above my pay grade, so I'm hoping it's not for you. This is from Christopher on LinkedIn. And this is an interesting question. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've got some thoughts on this, Craig. But Christopher says, I'm interested to know how Fuuz handles the structural drift that application logic inevitably applies to data that is not governed at the data layer.
Yep. So I think that's a fundamental design element that we incorporated into the Fuuz platform specifically. So we are a data layer first and foremost. So we've built a proprietary object relation model over top of our database that allows you to build a highly relational model to represent your business, a digital twin. And it's tightly coupled to the application layer in Fuuz. That's the big difference that we've seen with other IIoT type platforms, right? We don't have to name them all, but none of them have their own inherent data layer, which is what creates the big problem. You're always integrating them in with a SQL database or some other external database, and it's managed by different people. Changes are easily made, and that's where the transformation between data and application becomes a real bear and hard to manage. And what we've done is we've brought those two concepts together into a single place. It's the first of its kind in the industry. We've brought those concepts together so that building and maintaining, we can call them custom apps, but we don't really consider it customization because you're not writing any source code. But building and maintaining that becomes immensely easier over time. And also, I'll add, as we get into the era of AI, utilizing tools like LLMs to help you build those apps for you, or those frontline worker apps in Fuuz now becomes a reality because everything's operating off of that same data model, that same understanding of how the business works. You're not building everything in an isolated silo.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, no, that helped me, but I'll be curious to see what Christopher thinks if that answers his question. He has a
Oh,
follow-up.
this is another good question here.
Yeah, he says it's a common issue that maintainers implement the system they want to maintain, not the system the users want to use. But the same could be said of the developers, the buyers, the developers, and the integrators.
Yep.
What are your thoughts there?
I agree with this statement. This is, I think, one of the biggest issues with the industry. And I've done some posts and some podcasts recently about system integrators. And I've seen two sides of the coin. I've seen legacy integrators that just want to sell and deploy what they want to maintain, which is typically the legacy big box solutions that are very hard, very cumbersome, very costly, very not great for the end user, right? And then I've seen other integrators that are more forward looking. They're looking at new modern technologies that are going to be easier to maintain, maybe no maintenance. Our customers do absolutely zero maintenance of the Fuuz platform. We're a multi-tenant cloud hosted solution. All they do is build their solution. They don't have to worry about uptime. They don't have to worry about updates, upgrades. So we try to abstract all of the things that cripples a manufacturer so that they don't have to worry about it. I don't know how many manufacturers really strive to become a software company. And unfortunately, I think that's where a lot of IT departments and a lot of system integrators end up pushing manufacturers into. You have an IT group of 30 or 40 people, you've got application developers, and I just don't understand why. You should be focused on making parts, not building software.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. It makes total sense. And I'm with you. I don't know any manufacturer that wants to be an IT company, that wants to go through an ERP project. I'd take it one step further and say most of them want to avoid an ERP project at all costs if they can. But
nothing against IT, right? I mean, we need IT, but it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be 40% of our overhead cost.
Yeah.
It should be. It's just it's something the business needs, but it shouldn't become like the biggest component of doing business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's something we've got to be aware of in the future as we get more. When I say we, I mean just businesses in general and technology as an industry. As more organizations get locked into these big ERP systems in the cloud, AI agents, super high switching costs, who has all the leverage in the commercial relationship? It's going to be the vendors. And so I'm always looking for ways to help clients diversify and hedge against a big ERP vendor having all the leverage and pricing going forward. Because I just think there's a day of reckoning on the horizon, probably 5 to 10 years out, where people are going to look up and say, how in the hell are we now spending 40% of our overhead on IT, on the system that may or may not be delivering the value we expect? But switching from that's going to be such a pain because we've doubled down on this one vendor. We've gone clean core. We've gotten rid of all the customization and third-party apps and all the stuff. Now, all of a sudden, this one vendor has a lot of leverage. And some might say that's a very draconian George Orwell type of view of the world. But I think that's where the tech industry is going because it's in their best interest. So,
well, that's certainly where the vendors want it to go, right? And I would say not all vendors are going to be categorized in that because, we, for example, make sure that the customer always owns their data and always has access to that data, no matter when and where it is. And I think that's traditionally been, not to spill the beans, but when I worked at the ERP vendor, the number one trick was get as much of the customer's data in the system as you can, because that makes them sticky, right? And we hear that a lot in the software world. You got to remain sticky. And so they try to own your data. They make it difficult to access. They give you, limited access to it only through, report servers and things like that, not real time. Limited APIs, they purposely put these roadblocks in your way to having and gaining access to your data. I think we've seen the most recent occurrence of that, right, with the SAP announcement. And you can't just use your data with LLMs.
yeah.
But who owns your data? I mean, they've basically just staked the claim that they own your data.
Yeah, which is just crazy to me. That baffles me. Now, I want to add to what Craig and I were just talking about, a contrarian view that should make every CIO uncomfortable. And that is that you don't own your ERP data. Think about that for a minute. You don't own your ERP data anymore. At least that's what SAP is suggesting here. Your vendor does. You may not know it yet, but your vendor owns the data. Your vendor hosts it in the cloud. And in the case of SAP and perhaps others to follow, they will determine how you can or can't use that data. Now, SAP dropped this new API policy. They dropped it quietly a few weeks ago. There wasn't a big press release. There was a lot of firestorm on the internet about it because I was part of that, and I try to contribute to other conversations around that. But the fine print of their policy restricts how third-party AI agents and autonomous systems can interact with your data. They call it security, but we all know what it is. It's vendor lock dressed up in a security blanket. And SAP is not alone. Every major ERP vendor is moving in that direction. They restrict the APIs. They force you in the cloud. They push you towards their AI agents. They're making integration with anything outside their ecosystem progressively harder. When I say they, I don't just mean SAP. Other vendors are doing it, maybe to a lesser degree, maybe slightly less aggressive, but they're all doing it in some way. And so we have to ask ourselves why. And again, this is something that I cover in my new book called Welcome to the Machine. You just have to follow the money. Why do vendors do what they do, and how does that affect customers? Well, customers or vendors are doing this because investors reward annual recurring revenue. The stickier you are, the higher the stock price. The more they can lock in customers, the higher the stock price. The more they can get you to pay an annual cloud subscription that never goes away, the higher the stock price. So these vendors are getting just crazy multiples for their profitability, and executives and leaders within the vendors are getting huge comp plans or huge variable bonuses for increasing annual recurring revenue. So you can see, on the surface, I get why leaders within SAP are making that decision and why other ERP vendors are following suit. But I think the concerning thing here is that the customer's leverage in this game is shrinking by the year. I mean, by 2030, when the cloud migrations are done and customizations are stripped out and the third-party integrations are blocked, vendors are going to have you exactly where they want you. And replatforming is going to cost a lot more. It could cost more than just staying. So you've got two really crappy options that you're going to be staring down the barrel of in the future. And so my advice is to fight for your ownership now with data ownership, demand contractual rights, avoid clean core dogma, keep your options open, because the day you realize you can't leave is the day that your pricing gets very, very expensive. But we've got a lot more to cover. We're going to get back to the conversation with Craig here in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. Stick around.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
But probably the biggest lesson that I had from this project was the one thing that didn't go well. In this case, we had an aggressive timeline. We started to run into some trouble with some of the customization toward the end of testing. And what ended up happening is there were a couple of delays to the project as a result of testing issues resulting from the customization that the client wanted. Now, these were customizations that were, in my opinion, warranted. They made sense. They were what was needed to support the business and address the limitations of the software that was being implemented. And it did create problems, though, that even though they were warranted, it created some delays as the project went on. And I think there were 2 delays leading up to the go live, and there was about 30 days more work still remaining that we felt was needed to make the go live be lower risk. And so what we had suggested to this particular client is let's push another 30 days. It was going to cost a fairly nominal amount of, I think it was like $75,000 or $100,000 additional to increase the duration by another 30 days. And then we felt like that would mitigate the risk that we were running into during the testing. But what this client said was, in the spirit of his aggressive timeline and setting the clear vision, is that he didn't want to wait any longer. He wanted to go live and work through the problems after go live, but he was tired of spending the time and money, and he didn't want to have another delay on his watch. So we advised him not to do that. He chose to, so we followed the marching orders and moved forward with the implementation, and the go live didn't go well. They were unable to ship product for several weeks. When all was said and done, they had lost several $1 million of orders. They weren't just delayed or deferred or stuck in a backlog. They were actually lost orders because the customers couldn't wait for as long as it was going to take them to ship the product because of some of the other issues that were caused and that weren't addressed by the go live.
So that's a interesting case study. One of the more challenged implementations I've been involved with in my career, where the leader, made the decision that, let's just keep moving, let's hit our timeline, let's move fast. And it actually cost them a lot more. They saved money in the implementation, but the post-implementation ended up costing them a lot more than the implementation itself. And I think that's something, we keep coming back to, or sort of circling around here in the conversation here with Greg, is that there are a lot of trade-offs and risks that you've got to consider both sides of. So let's jump back into it, though. I think that's hopefully a good case study, a good setup for some of the remainder of what we want to cover here in the rest of the conversation here with Greg. SAP just a couple of weeks ago released a new policy for APIs, which is the interfacing with their core S/4HANA technology. And they've essentially said that they're putting limits on what APIs can or can't access data in S/4HANA. And they claim that it's a security compliance issue. And I'm calling complete BS on that, because that's not for SAP to decide. I mean, their software is going to be stable and secure. The data may not be, but that's to your point. You're the customer. If you want to screw up the integrations and make it insecure, create cybersecurity vulnerabilities, that should be your prerogative. I'm not saying anyone would or should do that, but that's not for SAP to decide. And if you stop and think, why they're doing it. They're doing it because they want you to use their pre-approved SAP sanctioned systems. And it's not just SAP. I mean, all the vendors in some way are moving towards this model of let's get everyone to double down on our software, because the investors love it. I mean, they're getting rewarded.
Oh yeah, for sure.
High stock prices and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and we've seen some, we work a lot with Oracle NetSuite, who has their MCP capabilities out now. So they're actually encouraging their clients to, use tools like Claude and GPT to connect and have access to your data. We do the same thing with Fuuz. We use an MCP. So you bring your own LLM. It's your data. It's the most valuable asset I think that a manufacturer has, is their data. And if you can't access it and leverage it, then you're paying a lot of money for, a locked up system that's not going to give you a lot of value long term.
Yeah, and you just gave me 2 questions that relate to that. One is from Mike on TikTok. Mike says, "Odoo doesn't play around with that. Your data is your data." Also, so open with their APIs. Hopefully, they stay that way, because SAP wasn't. Up until 2 weeks ago, they were not terrible about API interactions. And then there was a comment here, just a follow-up question on LinkedIn was, vendors typically steer to their capabilities, not to the customer needs, unless services are the thing really being sold. So that's a really good point. And then someone else on LinkedIn, and I apologize, I don't see the name of the person, says, "Oh man, customer ownership is their data is huge. That should be a key selling point. I have seen many easy on-ramps to move in, nearly impossible to get out. This is engineered vendor lock." It absolutely is. And you have to think about, it's, at the end of the day, this is one big system that's being built in the industry, right? Investors are rewarding those that can get their customers locked into their ecosystem.
Yep.
They're also rewarding the companies that can move as many people as possible to the cloud because that scales more profitably for the software vendor. So they need you to not customize, to not mess around with the way the software is built. They need you on a vanilla system because that's how they're rewarded. So this whole system, it's like you just have to follow the money to see where, why companies are acting the way they are and why individuals making decisions at these companies sometimes act what might seem irrational, but it's actually very rational. It's extremely rational. They're doing it because they make more money and it benefits them. But you as a customer have to really, grow a pair or, have a strong backbone and be able to say, no, this is what's best for our company and this is what we're doing.
Yep.
Is that hard for you? Do you see, when you're selling your product, do you see that traditional mindset of, well, this seems complicated, or I'd rather get to the answer I want to hear, which is easy button, off the shelf, pre-configured?
We do, and there's two sides to every coin. We see that oftentimes in the smaller mid-market, where they're looking for kind of that silver bullet to solve their problem quickly. So they'll typically pivot to something like that and then call us 6 months later when that's hit its limitations. We see that very not quite as often on the enterprise side. They oftentimes are a bit more digitally mature. They understand the limitations. And, to your point, we're kind of a different organization. We're bootstrapped here at Fuuz. So we aren't following the typical market norms when it comes to, owning our customers' data or forcing them down a certain path. I think that's one of the things that differentiates us in the marketplace is really following what the customer needs. Getting data in our system is very easy. Getting it out, we probably give you 10 ways to get it in. We probably give you 50 ways to get it out. And we've done that intentionally because I think when you're a system that enables rather than hinders, I think customers are more likely to stick around. I think they're going to appreciate the fact that your willingness to be open, like the gentleman made the comment about Odoo, right? So, people that have been there and been burned by these monolithic money grabs are looking for that open architecture.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Here's a comment from Third Stage on YouTube. Says, fit to standard works for standard operations, but people take it too far. Customizing everything locks in old habits and creates upgrade headaches later. Most companies don't fit entirely into either. And I think that's a fair comment. I mean, you can take either extreme too far. You can go too vanilla. You can go too customized. I think the key is to recognize where you can and should be customizing and not customizing, like you were saying, the gap stuff and the basic inventory management. There's certain things that are very well established in the world, and it doesn't vary from company to company. It shouldn't vary from company to company that much. Those areas are perfect for a traditional standard vanilla ERP system. But the problem is when you take that too far and then say, well, but we're also going to make every nook and cranny of your business standardized to conform to our software. That's where the problem is. And then there was another question from Megan I wanted to get to. Where did she go? Here she is. So Megan on LinkedIn says, after go live, who do you see run into more challenges down the road and need recovery? Those who went the route of customization or those that went the route of fit to standard, or maybe it's both? I don't know.
Well, it definitely depends. I would say we receive more calls from companies that tried the fit to standard. I get calls from CIOs all the time from opportunities that we weren't selected and they went with the safe choice, right? Because no one ever got fired by picking, Rockwell or Siemens or whatever. But then 6 months or a year later, when they're millions of dollars into the project and nothing's live and nothing integrates and the end users are frustrated, that's when we get the calls, unfortunately. The folks that go custom, typically have a reason for doing so. I think a lot of times they already have like a pretty well-established existing IT infrastructure. They have developers on staff, and they're not necessarily looking to maybe reduce that headcount. That's a business decision. And I think I see a lot of companies go down the path of building their own software because of that. They want to retain those folks. Companies that don't have that level of maturity, though, have to make a decision. Do we go commercial call it off the shelf platform that allows us to build and extend? Do we go, commercial off the shelf with no flexibility or extensibility? It's a pretty easy decision if I were running the company, but I'm not. So I wish I was sometimes.
Right. Yeah, but I think it's a good question that Megan asked, because I think to the point there that I would say is that there's risk on both sides of the equation. And you made this comment earlier, Craig, about how if you go fit to standard vanilla software off the shelf with very little to no changes to that software, you've solved a technical problem or a potential technical problem by simplifying your technology stack, because now you've got a very simple system, easier to maintain. But now all you've done is now you've created risk on the business side, which again isn't the end of the world, but the problem is most organizations don't realize that you've just created another risk. And in some cases, that risk of organizational change management, operational disruption, that's another thing. If you can't ship product when you go live, that's not good. Your IT people might be happy because the system's working, but if your business isn't working, that's a problem for most manufacturers. And so I think that's the risk reward that everyone has to go in with their eyes wide open and know that you are not really solving all the risks here, no matter what we do. Even if we do as you're saying, there's still risk. Now you've created some technical risk perhaps, but it may be that technical risk is a lot less, or it's a lot easier to deal with than the business risk of not doing what you're suggesting. Yeah,
you're just shifting the liability around. It just depends on your tolerance as an organization, your level of digital maturity. Do you have a team that can support a system, or do you not? Right? I think all of those things have to be considered, and whatever's the right choice for the business. At the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're making a decision that you have to stick with for the next decade. I see a lot of companies that move into these, configure to fit systems, and they're moving on from them within 2 to 3 years. That's the typical lifespan, I think, for most out of the box configured software is probably between 2 to 3 years, and that's fine. At that point, when you're ready for that next level of growth, you've already learned. Now you have that experience, so you can apply that to your next process.
Right. Here's a question from Sanjay on LinkedIn. Sanjay says, do you think the ERP implementations and vendors are going in the right direction? And how do you see the future of industrial operations?
Well, I guess, what do we think about that one, Eric? ERP implementations and vendors, I don't know if they're trying to lean more into operations or less, right? I guess it depends on the vendor a little. Like you mentioned, Infor, they do a little bit more than others, but then you've got folks like QAD that really don't do anything anymore on the shop floor. And we're seeing a lot of this as they move from on-prem to cloud. They tend to be giving up on the operations side of the business, right? They're kind of pulling that capability out. SAP going to the cloud. There is no more MII, right? There's no more. There's digital manufacturing, but we know it's very superficial. So there's a lot of superficial functionality. I think they're trying to get away from it, is my honest opinion, because they've realized it's too hard, and their systems aren't architected to support it. So I think they're opening the door for companies, like Fuuz and others out there in the Industry 4 space that can solve those or bridge those gaps for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's I agree with your response there. I think it depends on which vendor you're talking about. They're not all going. They're not all created equal.
Nope.
You talked about Infor, someone earlier, and in the TikTok chat, there's some discussion here around Odoo. A lot of people going back and forth here on Odoo and how it's not a manufacturing specific system, but it is a very different system in that it's open source. It's more flexible. You can create more stuff on your own with it. I think you guys are solving a different purpose, or you serve a different purpose than Odoo, but Odoo might have flavors of what you're doing built into your software. So really good points there. Here's a good question about, this is from Megan again on LinkedIn. Megan says, what level of digital maturity do you believe is needed to be able to properly implement Fuuz or any other software in general? So, when we think about digital maturity in general, what are the things like you see IT groups and business users need to have as sort of a prerequisite in order to be successful with these sorts of projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, on a scale of 0 to 5 for digital maturity, we see most of our clients are around a 2. And the way I would categorize a 2 is that, you know, they have some internal expertise, they have executive ownership, and they have some champions that understand where the business needs to go from a technology standpoint. I think anybody that's less than a 2 on that scale, we kind of identify those as really not having any internal knowledge or skills or ownership when it comes to technology. So, you know, we typically start around the 2. And by the time we're done, when, you know, we're implemented, we could probably say they're at a 4, you know, and I mean, it's really a huge transformation when the business focuses on the operational technology. You know, you start connecting machines and people and frontline workers, and you start embedding your operational models into the way people do their work every day. And you start enforcing processes and controls. So you have consistency of the outputs. That really is where continuous improvement starts. I think too many companies think that continuous improvement is just like this thing that somebody's going to make a suggestion and we're going to go and, you know, we're going to save all this money. But, you know, until you start measuring things consistently and reliably, you really don't even have that baseline established. So that's like a level 3 for me on the digital maturity, is having that baseline and data. Having your data, access to your data is, I think, one of the very first steps, right? It's kind of an elementary step into digital transformation.
Yeah. And you probably could have given that same answer 10 or 20 years ago. It's still something that companies were struggling with then. They struggle with it now. Hopefully companies start to get better at managing their data and getting data governance and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah. What about, you know, one thing we haven't talked about, and this is something that I knew, you know, when we were prepping yesterday, I wanted to make sure we had time to get to, and I almost forgot to get to it. And that is unified namespace, or UNS. You guys have built a platform on the unified namespace. Can you tell us, for those that don't know, just tell us real quickly at an elementary level, what is UNS, or unified namespace, and how does that relate to how you guys have built the software and how you view ERP and, you know, digital transformation projects?
Yeah. So, you know, when I started the company and we were implementing ERP systems, you know, we were working with tools like Boomi and MuleSoft and, you know, these iPaaS platforms to move data around. We had data lakes that we were moving data into. We always call them data swamps, right? Because it was just a bunch of junk. Nobody ever knew what to do with it. We were throwing BI tools over top of it, you know, Power BI, Tableau, what have you. And it wasn't really driving the business. You know, I'm not a huge fan of dashboards because I think that's kind of, it's after the fact, right? It's already happened. I can't fix it. So when I think of UNS, you have to flip that whole thing over on its head. And you basically, what you start doing is you start utilizing the data and operating the business from a real-time event stream. And so what that means is when something happens on my shop floor in real time, I see that happening in my unified namespace. Other systems subscribe to those events. So PubSub, we hear this oftentimes in integration, right? So it's instead of point-to-point integrations that run in batch or some kind of a time cycle, PubSub is real time. So when mail arrives in your mailbox today from the post office, you're going to go to your mailbox and you're going to take the mail out, right? So you're subscribing to your mailbox. You get it when the mail arrives. You're not sitting there waiting for days or weeks or months wondering, you know, what's going on. So that's kind of where unified namespace allows us to integrate systems in real time. And rather than kind of always looking in the rearview mirror, because hindsight's always 20/20, right? What was my OEE last week? Oh, it was 60%. That's not good. What's it this week? Well, I don't know because we didn't run the report yet, right? So the UNS gives us the ability to be more proactive and prescriptive in the way that we handle operations in real time. Fuuz is a real-time event-driven architecture. That's our whole platform is based on real-time events, where a traditional ERP is really two things. It's three things. It's a database, it's a front-end user interface, and it's something in between that accesses data within the database, right? It's the data sits there. It's what I call a stateless application. There is no current state of anything within the business. There's nowhere I can go to see an ERP, you know, what's Joey doing right now, right? I can if I run a report, but that means that some other system downstream has had to have already sent the data via API, right, in batch to the ERP. And the UNS is a place where I can go at any point in time and see things, just streaming in. I can subscribe to those events. I can make changes in other systems, and without having to do a lot of wiring of integrations. So it's a much different concept. It doesn't depend on any one technology. I think that's a misnomer that a lot of organizations have, like, oh, we have to implement MQTT to do UNS, or we have to have a time series historian to do UNS. None of that's true. It's really just an event streaming architecture. So
Right.
if you select a system like Fuuz, our entire backbone is an event-driven architecture. So what we say is we are enterprise UNS out of the box. Our customers on day one, when they sign up for Fuuz, have an enterprise UNS, and it's a concept that they've been trying to implement themselves using a multitude of different tools for the past several years, right? Because it's been very difficult to actually wrap anyone's head around what that means. So it's I don't. Hopefully that answers the question. I mean, it's a little bit of a technical question, but it's more about the architecture of the system than it is about any one technology.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. That's, architecture and data are not my biggest strength. So that was a really good explanation, because it's not something I fully had my arms around or my head around. And do you think that's where, if you had to make a prediction of where the market's headed here in the next 5-10 years, do you think
I think that's where integrations are going. Anybody that's maybe listening is familiar with SESME. We're working on the i3X API protocols to kind of build like a generic connectivity layer between different enterprise systems, and that's gonna work really well with unified namespace going forward. It's going to mitigate, possibly eliminate the integration risks and downsides of integrating different systems together. Just compatibility issues, right? I go, and you do too, a ton of manufacturers that have 6, 10, 12 different applications they're running, one for maintenance, one for warehouse, one for quality. None of them talk to each other. And why? Because integrations are hard. UNS makes integrations simple, and it makes them reliable.
Yeah, very interesting. And it provides that consistent architecture that can tie together multiple systems.
Yeah, very pluggable. Yep.
So for those, just to bring this all full circle and put a bow on everything we've talked about here today, what advice would you have for leaders or project teams that are trying to navigate the decision process? Perhaps they're trying to decide what technology or technologies are the best fit for them, or perhaps they're in the midst of an implementation, realizing that there's disconnects between what the software can and can't do and versus what their business needs are. What sort of advice would you give? Like, how would you get started to consider some of your options that are out there beyond your traditional ERP system?
What I recommend to companies all the time is you can speed up by slowing down.
So that's good stuff. Thanks, Craig. And I really appreciate you being on the show here today. And Craig's closing line is genuinely good advice, but it'll be forgotten within 30 seconds if I don't reinforce it again. So I want to make sure that we make it more than just a closing line, and that is you can speed up by slowing down. Most failed digital transformations had warning signs in the first 3 months. The team felt rushed. The vendor was pushing a date. Decisions were getting made before the right people in the room. And everybody knows something is off, but everybody keeps going anyway because slowing down feels embarrassing or expensive or just looks bad. It's not a good look. And a lot of times it's unfortunate because a lot of these expectations were unrealistic to begin with, but yet we end up rushing to try and meet these artificially compressed timelines and unreasonably optimistic assumptions. So here's what those companies eventually learn, though, and that is that the cost of pausing for a few weeks or even a couple months if needed is nothing compared to the cost of correcting a course at month 18 or after go live. You look at that case study I played for you earlier in the segment, the case study of the client that went live anyway. I often refer to that as the Hail Mary go live. It's just, let's just get it done. Let's just throw up a ball and hope that someone catches it. And it's very rare that someone catches it in those Hail Mary situations. So if something feels off, in your project, be sure to pause. And you don't have to do a full stop. You can slow things down and in parallel be assessing and pivoting and exploring your options in a way that doesn't ruin momentum. That's something we've done a lot with clients, where you keep things going, but you do an assessment in parallel. And once you hit that milestone, you pivot. You might do a hard pivot, but you do some sort of pivot. And you can bring in an objective third party like us, like our team at Third Stage. You can baseline expectations. You can renegotiate the timeline and really just ask the questions you've been afraid to ask all along. And by this point, hopefully you've got enough knowledge now that you've accumulated a lot of good lessons that you can learn from, that makes your pivot a little bit more informed. Now, keep in mind, if you do this, if you do what Craig is saying, Craig says speed up by slowing down. Well, the vendor doesn't want you to slow down. Your software vendor doesn't want to, because they need you up and running on the subscription as soon as possible on all the subscriptions, because that's how they make their money and that accelerates the revenue. The ERP consultants want you to rush because they can compress all their revenue into a short period and they can move on to the next project and do the same. So you've got two parties working with you that aren't going to tell you to slow down because it works against their own economic self-interest. This is the conflict of interest that is inherent in these sorts of projects. And so because the vendor doesn't want you to slow down, system integrator doesn't want you to slow down, the steering committee probably doesn't want you to slow down either, because they're being told by the vendor that, they can get this done in a certain amount of time and they don't want to spend more money and time on it. So everyone wants momentum, and momentum is actually an enemy of success, which is strange to say. But when you've got too much momentum that's not smart and it's not realistic, at the end of the day, it's your business, it's your data, it's your customers. You should be setting the tempo, not them. So I think that's the big thing here, is speeding up by slowing down is one of the biggest takeaways that I took from this conversation with Craig. And I want to thank Craig again for being here today. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. A lot of good stuff we covered here today. And the questions we didn't get to, hopefully we can get to in one of the next episodes coming up too. So keep the comments coming. I'd love to hear any additional thoughts you have related to these threads we discussed here today. Drop them in the comments and we'll use that in a future episode as well. So hope you all had a great day, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Hope you're all doing well. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Take care.